On the day I turned 18, my parents didn't give me a gift. They performed an exorcism. They surgically removed me from the family portrait, packed their bags, and left me to rot in the silent tomb of our house. Their last message wasn't a birthday card. It was a social media post from the airport, a smiling selfie with my brother, champagne in hand, captioned, "Family first." They were jetting off to Europe for 2 weeks. They left me behind with pizza money and a silence so profound it felt like I was already dead. But in that dead quiet, I went hunting for ghosts. And I found one. In the forbidden sanctuary of my father's office, I found the secret they had buried for 18 years, a faded manila envelope. Inside, the truth wasn't just a document. It was a curse. Pfft. My adoption papers. In that instant, the polite, obedient girl they thought they knew was strangled by the truth. Something else crawled out of her skin, fueled by a rage so cold it burned. They thought they had left a ghost behind. They have no idea they created a monster. And this monster is going to burn their entire world to the ground. Before that day, if you looked at my life from the outside, it was perfect. We were the ideal family, a picture of suburban success. My dad was a respected financial advisor, and my mom was a pillar of the community, always busy with local charities. They had the right house in the right neighborhood, drove the right cars, and belonged to the right country club. And they had 2 kids, my older brother Mark, and me, Clara. But if you scratched just a little below that shiny surface, you'd see the cracks. They'd always been there. I just never knew what I was looking at. Mark was the golden child, the heir to the throne. He was a carbon copy of my dad, in looks and ambition. He could do no wrong. His C+ average? Oh, that's just a sign of a brilliant mind bored by school. Quitting the soccer team? A strategic move to focus on what's important. Every single mediocre thing he did was celebrated, and every screw-up was lovingly excused. He was their legacy. He was their blood. I, on the other hand, was their project. My whole childhood felt like one long performance review. My straight A's got me a simple nod and a, "Well, don't get complacent, Clara." I won the state-level science fair, but that was completely overshadowed by Mark getting an honorable mention in a local photo contest. I had to be perfect, polite, and poised all the time. I was like a walking, talking trophy for their amazing parenting skills. An accessory they could show off at dinner parties. In our house, love wasn't a feeling. It was a reward for meeting expectations. It was conditional, and the conditions were always changing, always just out of my reach. I spent years twisting myself into a pretzel trying to be the daughter I thought they wanted, but always feeling like I was falling short, like some key part of me just wasn't good enough. Turns out, I was right. The rest of the family wasn't much better. Our lives were like a competitive sport. Family get-togethers weren't about catching up. They were about quietly sizing everyone up. Who got a promotion? Whose kids got into the best schools? It was just this endless cycle of judgment, all run by my grandparents who were obsessed with image and lineage. But as my 18th birthday got closer, I actually felt a little flicker of hope. For months, my parents had been talking about it. "Your 18th is a huge milestone, Clara," my mom had said with this warmth in her voice I'd never heard before. "We have to do something really special." They talked about a huge party at the country club, a car, a trip to New York. It was the first time they had ever even suggested doing something so big for me, and I held on to that promise like it was a life raft. For once, I felt seen. I let myself believe this was it. The moment everything would change. The moment I'd finally feel like I belonged, that I was just as loved as Mark. I spent weeks daydreaming about it, sketching dress ideas, making guest lists. I was so naive. I was so desperate for them to love me that I completely ignored all the red flags, like the fact that they never actually booked a venue or sent out an invitation. I just kept on believing. On my nightstand, I had this small, carved wooden box. My dad gave it to me when I was little, telling me his dad, my grandfather, had carved it for me before he died. It was my most prized possession. Inside, I kept my treasures: a seashell from my first beach trip, a spelling bee ribbon, a faded photo of me and Mark when we were little enough to still be friends. That box was my connection to a family history I wanted so badly to be a part of. It felt like proof that I belonged. But that box, like everything else, was a lie. It was just another prop in the big show of my life, and the final act was about to start. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I didn't wake up to singing or the smell of pancakes. I woke up, but there was nothing. The house was still, sterile, and empty. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. I called out, "Mom? Dad?" Just my own voice echoing back at me. I walked into the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. Propped against the sugar bowl was a single white envelope. Not a birthday card. Just a plain business envelope with Clara written on it in my mother's neat, impersonal handwriting. My hands were shaking when I tore it open. The note inside was short, brutal. "Clara," it said. "A last-minute, unavoidable opportunity came up for a trip. Had to leave early this morning. Mark is with us. There's money for pizza in the kitchen drawer. Be good. We'll be back in 2 weeks." That was it. No happy birthday. No we love you. Just be good. Like I was the house sitter. The casual cruelty of it just knocked the wind out of me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the note fluttering out of my hand. Then I looked at my phone, and there it was. A new post from my mom put up an hour ago from the airport lounge. A selfie of her, my dad, and Mark, all beaming, holding champagne glasses. The caption said, "Off to Europe. A much-needed family getaway to celebrate life. Hashtag family first. Hashtag blessed. Family first." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't family. I was an afterthought they left behind with pizza money. The whole perfect family fantasy I'd been living in just crumbled. All that hope I had held on to turned into this cold, hard rage. I wasn't just sad. I felt erased. Something in me just snapped. The good girl, the quiet girl, the girl who did what she was told, she was gone. I needed answers. I needed to understand why. What did I ever do to deserve to be treated like this? My mind was racing, trying to find anything that would make sense of this. And then it hit me. My dad's study. The one room in the house that was totally off limits. He kept everything in there. His entire life locked away in a big mahogany desk. Fueled by a rage I'd never felt before, I walked to the study and tried the door. Locked. Of course. But I'd spent years watching them. I knew my dad kept a spare key on top of the door frame, thinking no one was smart enough to find it. My fingers found the cool metal. The lock clicked open. The room smelled like old paper and leather. It felt like thoughtful was a plain yellowed manila envelope. No label. It just felt secret. My heart was pounding as I pulled it out and sat down in my dad's huge leather chair. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open it. I slid the papers out onto the desk. The first thing I saw was a hospital birth certificate, but the name at the top wasn't Clara Miller. It was Baby Girl Evans. Mother's name, Sarah Evans. Father, unknown. I just stared at it, my brain refusing to work. Evans, not Miller. I frantically looked through the other papers, legal documents, court orders, and then I saw the final decree. The words just jumped off the page and burned into my brain. Final decree of adoption. It said that one baby girl Evans was to be legally adopted by Thomas and Eleanor Miller, and her name would be changed to Clara Miller. The date on the decree was 18 years ago. To the day. My birthday. My whole world just spun. Every single memory I had, my entire life, was suddenly filtered through this new, ugly lens. That feeling of being an outsider, the constant need to prove I was good enough, the way they always favored Mark, it all made a horrible kind of sense. I wasn't their daughter. I was a transaction, a secret they bought and buried. I wasn't their blood. And the little wooden box my grandfather supposedly carved for me? It was a lie. All of it. A fiction they created to keep me in line, to keep me from ever asking questions. The hurt was so deep, it felt like a black hole had opened up inside me. But underneath the hurt, something else was growing. Something cold, clear, and hard as a diamond. The need for justice, for payback. They left me on my birthday to find out my whole life was a lie. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. When my parents and Mark got back, 2 weeks later, all tan and loaded down with expensive souvenirs, they walked into a spotless house and found a daughter who was chillingly quiet. I was in the living room reading a book. My mom breezed in, dropping her designer bag on the floor. "Clara, the house looks wonderful. See, we knew you were responsible," she said, like she was complimenting the pet sitter. My dad just grunted and started sorting the mail. Mark tossed a small box on the coffee table. "Got you this," he mumbled, not even looking at me. It was a cheap keychain from Paris. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I waited until they were unpacked and settled with their drinks. Then I walked into the room and placed the manila envelope on the table right between them. "I believe this is yours," I said. My voice was completely steady. The color just drained from their faces. My dad's hand froze, with his scotch glass halfway to his mouth. My mom's smile just collapsed. The gaslighting started immediately. It wasn't a secret. It was a private matter. They were protecting me. I was being too sensitive, too dramatic. How dare I go through my father's private things? It quickly turned into a full-on attack on me, on my ingratitude. They weren't sorry they lied. They were furious I found out. That was it. That was the moment. Any last bit of love I had for them just evaporated, replaced by cold resolve. I didn't argue. I just nodded, said, "I understand," and walked back to my room. They thought my silence was me giving in. They thought they'd won. that they had put their dramatic child back in her box. They were so wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned, and my revenge wasn't going to be one big dramatic scene. It would be slow, meticulous. I was going to dismantle their entire world, and I was going to do it by building my own. First to go, their plans for my future. They had me all signed up for the local state university, a decent but boring school where they could keep an eye on me. I let them think I was going. But secretly, I spent every night for a month filling out applications and scholarship essays to top universities across the country. I wrote about my passion for economics, a sanitized version of my new obsession with power and independence. I poured every bit of my pain and anger into those essays. And it worked. The acceptance letters and scholarship offers started rolling in. I picked a prestigious university on the opposite coast. I didn't tell them until 2 weeks before I left. The fight was epic, but their anger just fueled me. I packed 2 suitcases, turned down their fake offers of money, and walked out of the house that was never really my home. College was my training ground. I wasn't Clara Miller anymore. I was building a new identity from scratch. I took a brutal course load and worked 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs. I was a barista at dawn, a research assistant during the day, and a freelance coder at night. While other kids were at parties, I was in the library, devouring books on finance, corporate law, and investment strategy. Every dollar I earned, thoughtful. I saved. I lived in the cheapest dorm, ate ramen, and wore clothes from thrift stores. My life was just work, study, sleep, repeat. But with every day, I felt stronger, determined. I started investing the little money I had. I was cautious at first, but as I learned more, I got more confident. I started analyzing market trends, finding undervalued tech startups. I had a knack for it. My little nest egg started to grow. First slowly, then all at once. By the time I graduated, summa cum laude, I had a job offer from a top investment firm and a personal portfolio worth more than my parents' annual income. Through all those years, I kept up a superficial relationship with the Millers. I called on holidays, sent polite text. I played the part. On my brief visits home for Christmas, I gathered intel. I could see the cracks forming in their perfect life. My dad had made some bad investments. My mom's charity work was really just a front for a lifestyle they couldn't afford anymore. They were bleeding money, trying desperately to keep up appearances. They saw my success not with pride, but with greed. They started making jokes about how their successful daughter would have to take care of them one day. Then they started asking for small loans, then bigger ones. I always had a polite, bulletproof excuse. Sorry, Dad. All my assets are tied up in long-term investments. It would be fiscally irresponsible to liquidate them. Using their own jargon against them was a small, sweet victory. The perfect opportunity for my endgame came during one of those visits. My mother announced with a huge flourish, that they were hosting a lavish 50th wedding anniversary party for my grandparents. The social event of the year, the whole family would be there, including my great-uncle Richard, the true family patriarch, a self-made billionaire who was notoriously sharp. One night, I overheard my parents talking in hushed, desperate whispers. This party was their Hail Mary. They were planning to use the celebration of family legacy to hit up Uncle Richard for a massive investment in one of my dad's failing businesses, an amount that would save them. The stage was set, the audience was gathered. Determined, this was my moment. But there was one more piece I needed for myself. I had to know where I came from. Using the info from the adoption file, I started searching for Sarah Evans. It took a long time, but I finally found her. She was a librarian in a small town a few states away. I wrote her a letter, nervously, my hands shaking. A week later, she called me. We met for coffee. She was nervous and kind, and she had my eyes. She told me she was 17, alone, and terrified. She gave me up not because she didn't want me, but because she loved me so much, she wanted me to have a better life. She had thought about me every single day for 22 years. There were tears, and for the first time, a sense of closure. I felt this immediate, deep connection that I had been starving for my entire life. And she had a family, a loving husband and 2 sons who were excited to find out they had a sister. I hadn't just found my birth mother, I'd found my real family. The hole in my heart that the Millers had carved out finally started to heal. And with that healing came my final piece of armor. The last step was legal. I hired a lawyer and started the process of changing my name. I was shedding the last piece of the Millers. When I walked into that anniversary party, I wouldn't be Clara Miller. I would be Clara Evans. And I had one final, devastating piece of my plan ready. I had spent months quietly tracking my parents' growing debts. Through a shell corporation I set up, I started buying that debt from their creditors. They had no idea that the anonymous investment firm that was now their biggest creditor was me. The power was completely and irreversibly mine. The night of the 50th anniversary party was a spectacle of wealth and lies. It was at the most exclusive ballroom in the city, dripping with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with champagne. My parents, Eleanor and Thomas Miller, were in their element, gliding through the crowd like royalty, triumphant smiles plastered on their faces. They looked at me when I came in, and I saw a flicker of surprise. I was not the thrift store student they remembered. I was wearing a custom-tailored emerald green dress, a color that screamed money and power. For the first time, I looked like I belonged in a room like this, but on my own terms. My mother rushed over. "Clara, you look stunning. That dress must have cost a fortune." "It did," I said with a cool smile. "It's amazing what you can afford when you're not supporting someone else's bad habits." She physically recoiled, forcing a laugh before someone pulled her away. For the next hour, I moved through the room, polite to my grandparents, exchanging pleasantries with relatives who had barely looked at me my whole life. And I had a long, engaging conversation with Great-Uncle Richard. I didn't talk about my parents. I talked about macroeconomic trends, emerging markets, a tech sector I knew he was interested in. He was impressed. I could see it in his sharp. Finally, the moment came. My father, Thomas Miller, stood at the podium and tapped a glass. The room went silent. He launched into this long, rambling speech about 50 years of love and legacy. He talked about the importance of family, of blood, of the unbreakable bonds. He looked at my grandparents. Then his eyes scanned the room, landing on Uncle Richard for just a little too long. It was the perfect, sickening setup. When he finished, I made my move. I walked toward the stage, caught the event coordinator's eye, and said I'd like to say a few words. My father looked panicked, but he couldn't refuse me in front of everyone. He reluctantly handed me the microphone, a tense smile frozen on his face. "Thank you, Dad," I began, my voice clear and steady through the ballroom. "I won't take up too much time. I just want to add my own tribute to this incredible legacy we're all celebrating." I looked out at the sea of faces. Family is a powerful word. It's about support, trust, and unconditional love. And I want to publicly thank my parents, Thomas and Eleanor, for teaching me so much about the true meaning of family. I let that hang in the air. My parents relaxed. I could see a smug look on my mother's face. They thought I was finally playing along. They taught me, for instance, what it feels like to be abandoned on your 18th birthday, I continued, my tone shifting from sweet to ice. A confused murmur went through the crowd. While they were taking a family-first vacation to Europe, I was at home, alone, discovering a fascinating piece of family history they had protected me from my entire life. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a copy of my adoption decree because, you see, the biggest lesson Thomas and Eleanor Miller taught me is that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's just about good paperwork." The room was dead silent. My mother's face was a mask of pure horror. My father looked like he'd been turned to stone. "They kept this a secret from me, and from all of you for my whole life," I went on. "Maybe because they were ashamed. Or maybe because it's hard to sell a story of a perfect family legacy when one of your kids is just an inconvenient purchase." I turned my gaze to Great-Uncle Richard. "This party, this beautiful, expensive display, it's not just for my grandparents. It's an audition. A last-ditch effort to convince you, Uncle Richard, to bail them out of the mountain of debt they've racked up trying to live a life they can't afford. They aren't celebrating family, they're leveraging it." The guests were just staring at my— "But I believe in personal responsibility," I said, delivering the final blow. "So I decided to solve their financial problem myself. Over the last several months, I've been buying up all of their debt. So please, everyone, enjoy the champagne. It's all on my tab." I paused, looking right at my father. "As of this morning, I am your sole creditor. We have a meeting on Monday to discuss repayment terms. Don't be late." With that, I placed the microphone gently back on the podium. I didn't need to say another word. The destruction was complete. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I had zero interest in the tears, the arguments, or the desperate attempts at damage control. My part in their story was over. As I turned from the podium, I saw my mother just collapse into a chair, her face in her hands. My father was frozen, his face a ghastly shade of gray, staring at nothing. Great-Uncle Richard was looking right at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of actual respect in a relative's eyes. He gave me a slow, tiny nod. I walked through the stunned crowd, a silent path parting for me as I went. The whispers started behind me, this growing wave of scandal that would be the talk of their town for years. I could hear the start of a huge fight between my grandparents and my father. Their beautiful party, the symbol of their precious legacy, was imploding. I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, it felt like it was my own air to breathe. The weight of 18 years of lies, of trying so hard, of feeling less than, it was just gone. I hadn't just exposed them, I had set myself free. I left the wreckage of their lives behind me and walked toward my own quiet, peaceful future. In the months that followed, the Miller empire crumbled. Their social standing was obliterated. Uncle Richard, disgusted by their lies, cut them off completely. Without his money and with me as their unforgiving creditor, they had to sell everything. The house, the cars, all of it. They had built their life on a foundation of image and lies, and I just held up a mirror. My life, on the other hand, took off. My career soared. I built a real, loving relationship with my birth mother, Sarah, and my new brothers. We are a family built not on secrets, but on honesty and acceptance. I never needed their money or their name. I just needed the truth. The pain they caused me was the fire that forged me into the woman I am today. Strong, independent, and finally at peace. Sometimes I think about that little girl who cried herself to sleep on her 18th birthday. And I raise a glass to her because she survived, she endured, and in the end, she won. So, that's my story. It was a long, painful road. But I have to ask you, what do you think? Was I right to expose them like that in front of everyone, or did I go too far?